Hello, I'm Sophie D'Souza and welcome to my channel Sophie Stained Glass. You're very welcome if you're joining me for the first time today, and to all my subscribers, thank you for your support. I'm going to do a whole series of videos about designing. Now, I've done a lot of videos about designing on a computer, but what I'm going to be talking about in this series are design considerations and what makes a good design, what makes a bad design, how to improve your design, all that sort of thing. This first video is a list of things to think about when you're designing. And it's something I've been working on for my book, and this comes from the chapter on designing. So I hope you find it useful. If you think I've missed something out, do let me know. Thank you, and please subscribe. So this is my design considerations checklist. There are quite a few things to think about, but I'll just go through them. Position. Where is your glass going? Because this will make a difference to how you approach your design. For example, if it's going into a 1930s front door, you don't need to do something that is a replica of a 1930s front door, but you should do something sympathetic to that period of architecture, whether it be through form or through the 1930s very distinctive colour palette. The next thing, privacy. Mostly if you're putting some glass into your house, you will want to try and do a bit of screening so that people can't just see straight through, and this is where textured glass comes in. I would not ever use opaque glass because it's going to unbalance your design and block out the light. Screening, so privacy is not letting people see in, and screening is more about not wanting to see what's outside your window, which might be a brick wall or your neighbour's bathroom, something you don't want to see. So in these instances, again, a textured glass or a semi-opaque glass like a streaky is good. Light. So if you have stained glass instead of clear glass in a window, you're going to block out some of the light. So the darker the colour, clearly, the more light you're going to block out. So you need to consider the internal environment and the aspect of the window. If it's a south-facing window, it'll get a lot of light, and it probably would help to have slightly dark colour because it can be a little bit blinding. But if it's north-facing, well, maybe you want to keep it light. Scale. Now, I'll give an example of what I mean with this. So I did a window in a church, and it had lots of lilies in it, and it was a huge window. And what was not easy to judge was how big the lilies needed to be, because of course I'm designing on a computer, and the lilies look fine on my design. But when you blow that design up to a sort of 5 metre high, 3 metre wide window, you can get some horrible things happen. I once did some grapes that ended up like golf balls. So what I now do is like I did for this particular church window, was I printed off the lilies in a variety of sizes. I went over to the church, got a ladder out, climbed up, taped them to the window, stood back and looked at them. And it was immediately obvious what size my lilies needed to be. So have a little think about that. Internal scale. This means, does everything in your design make sense? You know, have you got a sort of flower that's the wrong size for the tree it's next to? So if you're doing maybe a landscape and it's going off into the distance, and maybe you've got trees along the way, are they reducing in size correctly? Or have you got them stood next to a massive cow or something? That's the sort of thing to think about. quarries. Quarries are a very common way of dividing up the background of a window, and they are the squares or rectangles or diamonds that you see everywhere in stained glass design, in leaded design anyway. So you need to be careful that the size of your quarries is, the proportions are correct. So you'd probably want them to be about 10 centimetres by 12 centimetres roughly. Obviously it depends on the size of your window, and you need to calculate that very carefully. They'll very rarely come out as a square because spaces just don't divide up that tidily. That's one of the reasons that people use diamonds, because you can stretch the diamond so you get a completely regular diamond. Otherwise it's rectangles, and yeah, you need a calculator for that. Lining up, and what I mean by this is what is around the window that is feeding information into the window, and most commonly this will be perhaps a window next to the door. Often the window in the door doesn't survive because that goes first because of all the banging of the door, whereas the window next to the door is still in good nick. So there's a flower in the window next to the door. The flower in the door should be at the same height, and you should try and make your quarries very similar proportion to the side window. So that's the sort of thing you need to think about. Budget. So you will need to consider this if you haven't got resources unending, but also if you're working for clients, because most clients don't want to pay for handmade glass. So you need to tell them there is a difference. And also I always like to tell them that hotter colours cost more than cooler colours. So, you know, the reds and pinks cost more than the blues and greens. Strength. So this is important in a window, and you need to try and avoid delicate, thin, curvy shapes because they will probably snap. If they're difficult to cut, it means they will be more vulnerable in situ. You also need to avoid lots and lots of lead lines all finishing up together in a big jumble of lead, because that will be a really soft bit of your window. That might start to sag, and that will cause the glass to snap. Also try and avoid long shapes that run the whole width or the whole length of the window, because if they're thin, they may well snap. If they're thick, they'll probably be all right, or if they're fat, but you know, I can't really think of a context in which you'd have a fat piece of glass running the whole width or length of a window. So yes, just be a little aware of the how delicate the pieces are that you're making and how much lead is in your window. Saddle bars. These are used especially indoors, as in not inside, but in a front door. And in the window of a front door, usually one is enough. When I put church windows in, I put them about every 18 inches, and they run across the width of the window, and they are embedded into the wood of the door on either side, and you solder little metal ties onto the window and tie the window to the bars, and this will do wonders for the longevity of your window, and they are not to be ignored. Internal strengthening. So you can also buy lead that has got a small steel running through its heart. Clearly that's not going to bend into anything other than a wide curve, but they can be very useful if you sort of work them into your design. Sometimes using a saddle bar is tricky because it's going to really interfere with the design. And there have been times where I've used saddle bars and internal strengthening. In addition to the lead with the steel in, you can buy steel and insert it into the lead as you make. Do remember, when you're cutting glass for a window that's going to have this internal strengthening, you'll need to cut your glass a little smaller because the heart of your lead is going to be bigger. Colour. I know there are loads of amazing colours out there, and they are just jewel-like and wonderful, but avoid using nothing but bright colours because it's too noisy. Your eye doesn't know where to look. And by all means, have a feature glass, have an area in the window which is brighter, and maybe that draws the eye, but use lots of muted glass as well. There is a reason why a lot of traditional glass just has an amber background. You don't want things competing, and sometimes a gentle palette of pastels with one bright element works very well. In fact, most of the time that's going to work really well. Sometimes all just subtle colours can be a very serene window. And finally, feature glass. Sometimes you can go to a glass shop and see the most exquisite glass and you don't even know what you're going to use it for yet, but it inspires you. So buy it, come home and make something beautiful. Quite often a feature glass will do the work for you. You can get glass that looks like grass or the sea, and confetti glass looks like blossom. That's so pretty. So just sometimes go to a glass shop with an open mind and be inspired. So there is my checklist of design considerations, and I know that's a long list. And at first you're going to think, well, how am I supposed to remember all that? But you will find that as you progress in your stained glass journey, you will start just automatically bearing all these considerations in mind, and it all feeds in to your design. And if you do remember all these things, which you will produce a much more successful design, and it will look more stained glassy, if you know what I mean. Because when you design for stained glass, it's not like designing for anything else. These traditions and sort of parameters will help you produce something that looks very authentic. So I hope that's been helpful. If you've got any comments, I love to hear them. Please subscribe and like. And if you hit the bell button, you will be notified every time I post a video. And just to say that I'm going to do a whole series on designing for glass, where I will take a few examples of designs and talk through them. So stay tuned. Thank you.